I'm standing on the 6th floor of a tower block overlooking a playground. I knock on Tom's door, and his 4 daughters come out and they crowd around me. They give me a warning shot. Don't tell Dad he's dying, he couldn't cope. They stand in the corner of the room as I go over to Tom. He looks frail and jaundiced in a big armchair. He beckons me down and whispers in my ear, "Don't tell my daughters I'm dying. They won't be able to cope." We're born and we die. Death, like birth, can be quick and painless, or it can be protracted and distressing. But when we know we're going to give birth, we have lots of time, don't we? We have months where we go to the doctors, go to classes, we probably read books, swap stories with our friends. We have a plan and we know what to expect. But it's not quite like that when you're dying. How would you know what to expect? In 2009, I went to a small festival in Dorset, and it was about death and dying. And I'd been a community hospice nurse for 12 years then. But it was quite an eye-opener to me, both personally and professionally, and it's probably the reason I'm standing talking to you now. So amongst other things, I saw a handmade felt shroud being made. Who knew you could get buried in just a shroud? I didn't. It was called Bella Couche, beautiful layer. It looked warm and cosy, all enveloping. Bella Couche. And I saw a man lovingly painting a cardboard coffin. So a few weeks later, I visited Mum and Dad. I thought it was a really good opportunity to bring up the subject. Well, with my mum, my dad said, "Charming, can't we talk about something more pleasant?" And he just walked straight out of the room. But my mum, she said 3 things to me. She said, "Can you paint my coffin in a beach scene? I'd like Rod Stewart's I Am Sailing at my service, and I'd like to be cremated." 6 months later, Mum died really suddenly, and for a family in turmoil, it was really helpful to have those 3 pointers. And my sister and I spent a couple of mornings at the back of the funeral directors, lovingly painting that beach scene. We made 15 little beach huts, and each family member decorated one to put around the coffin. And we invited each of them to put a letter in. My dad said, "How will she read it, Deb?" My dad's an accountant. I said, "She just will." And that night, he wrote a long letter to say goodbye to the love of his life. Now, I was very proud of that coffin, and I was a bit upset it got burnt, to be honest. But luckily, we'd taken some photos of it. And I showed one of those photos to Ellen, because Ellen wanted to include her children in her funeral planning, and they thought it was a really good idea. And after Ellen died, on the day of her service, if you walked into the church, at the end of the coffin, in big bold letters, was her favourite expression. And it said, "Does my bum look big in this?" So visiting Ellen and her family reminded me that it's very important, the language you use, and that you include children. Because Ellen had told her children she wasn't going to get better, so she thought they knew she was dying. And then one day, her 10-year-old chirpily came along and said, "Mummy, if you're not going to get any better, does that mean you're just going to stay in bed forever and we'll have to look after you?" That was a bit of a shock. And after Ellen had died at home, her 3 children wanted to curl up with her one last time. But their grandparents were distraught at the idea. So their dad phoned me for a bit of reassurance, because as a parent, you know your children pretty well. And they did curl up with their mum one last time, and like kids do, when they were ready, they got off the bed, went back to the kitchen, finished their Cocoa Pops for breakfast. So death and dying has been largely taken away from us as individuals, families and communities. Taken away by professionals, hospitals, hospices, funeral directors. So when it happens, it's quite hard to know what to do, what to say, and where to turn. I went to the South Bank to another death fest, and I've got to say, I don't keep doing this. It was only 2, all right. But what surprised me, there was hundreds of people there, and I just thought, yeah, people do want to know about this, and it is important. So why don't we do something in Southampton? So Chris, my partner, works with young children at a study centre. And one day when they were having a roadkill burial, like you do, he said to the children, "What are the rules of funerals?" And this little boy says, "There aren't any, Chris." And that is just about true. Because did you know that you can keep the body at home and care for it yourself? You don't need a funeral director. You could wrap it in a sheet and bury it in your back garden. That's how few rules there are. And then Chris, obviously getting excited about this subject as well, sent me a little picture of a wood mouse Viking burial on their school pond. And then we decided to join forces and have a family-friendly dying awareness event in Southampton. So have any of you ever thought about what you might want to happen to you if you were really ill and weren't able to tell anybody at the time? Would you opt for quantity, quality over quantity, or quantity over quality? Which would you opt for? And who would you want to talk on your behalf? So Bill was told he had a progressive disease, and his doctors had said that at some point he won't be able to move and he won't be able to talk. So he wasn't keen on the idea of discussing dying, but actually realised that if he didn't do it then, he wouldn't have a chance later. So he was very definite. He didn't want his life prolonged at all, and he was only going outside of his house in a cardboard box, which I suggested to him might be sooner rather than later, because his habit of lighting his roll-ups was his arms didn't work. So he'd pick one up, lean over his gas stove, and do that, and would always singe his eyebrows. So because of that decision, we let all the services know, we got in some equipment, and we made sure medication was there for when he was dying, so there was no great panic at the end. And then Bob, with a little glint in his eye, decided to tell his grandchildren what was going to happen to him after he died. Because he wanted to be buried face down on top of their grandmother. So yeah. So when they heard thunder in future, it was them having sex in the graveyard. So when somebody's been told they've got an incurable disease, they and their family will have thought about dying, but they might not have talked about it. And then it gets harder to talk about it, because then everybody's being very positive and talking about work and the weather. But there's going to be lots of questions, isn't there? When might it happen? How will I know I'm dying? Will it be painful? Who will support my family? Can I be at home? And I wonder how much it matters where you are when you die. So Pete's dad was 98, had severe dementia, was bedbound and very well cared for in a nursing home. But when he got an infection, he got taken to A&E. And 3 days later, he died on a very busy medical ward, all alone. And the hospital consultant talked to his family and apologised profusely, because he never should have been taken into hospital. And Simeon was on a busy ward, but his condition was deteriorating quite quickly. So they found him a side room where all the staff knew him. His friends stayed overnight and played his guitar to him. And his girlfriend curled up in bed with him when he was dying. Lots of people say they'd like to die in a hospice. It's quieter. There's better staffing. And the furniture all matches. So that's exactly why 17-year-old Jack didn't want to go into one. Because on being shown round his local hospice, he exclaimed loudly, "I ain't dying in no fucking Holiday Inn." So everything's got much more medical. We can intervene, we can keep people alive. But at what cost? Now picture this scenario for a moment. Anne is dying at home. She's now unconscious, and her breathing is erratic and noisy. And it's actually quite scary to listen to. But her partner Kitty has talked to the nurses, and they've explained this is part of the dying process, and Anne is not suffering. So Kitty's able to just stay with her, and she knows that when she dies, she needs to phone the GP, who will come out and certify the death later that day. So picture this scenario, and believe me, either can happen quite easily. Anne's dying at home. She's now unconscious. Her breathing is noisy and erratic, and it's scary to hear. And Kitty doesn't know what's happening, so she phones 999. Is the patient conscious and breathing? No, she's not. Ambulance arrives, sirens are full on, Anne is put on the floor and they start pounding on her chest. Kitty pleads with them to stop, and then she remembers that the doctor has signed a do not attempt resuscitation form, but is still at the surgery because they didn't have time to pick it up. And then a little while later, it goes quiet. Anne is declared dead. A policeman has to stay with the body until the funeral director comes, and then the coroner will be involved. So there's so many stories, and Chris and I, in October, November this year, are putting on a series of events called Dead Good Days in Southampton. So do find out about it and come along. But more importantly, today, have a think about talking to somebody, opening up that conversation, talking about your wishes, their wishes. Make your will, do something positive, because we only have one chance to get that right. So my dad did let us know what he wanted, and we signed the power of attorney forms to be his legal advocates, but only just got it in time. We were lucky that I knew what to do. So when we had an out-of-hours GP call in, and she tried to persuade me to send Dad to hospital for a few days, I could say, no way, Doc. You know, we did that last year, and we've only just got him back home again. So Dad died in his bed, and I was in the bed next to him. The sun shone on the sea. There was peace in the room. There was also the smell of gas in the kitchen and a very alarmed woman on the end of the phone when my niece Zoe said, "There's been a gas leak. I'm at my granddad's flat. He's dead." The engineer ran in, fixed the leak, ran out again, and said he didn't need paying. So we shut the door and we all started laughing very loudly. Because my dad hadn't been dead an hour and he had got out of paying that bill. He'd have been so proud of himself. So we kept Dad at home for the day. Family came in, we chatted and laughed and we cried. We drank tea and champagne. And then we phoned the best ever funeral director. And my advice to you, if you use a funeral director, find your best ever before you need them. My other advice is always book a double time slot at the crematorium. So Cara came and they put Dad on the stretcher. And I saw they were covering him with a homemade felt shroud. It was called Bella Couche, beautiful layer. It looked warm and cosy, all enveloping. Bella Couche, thank you. Thanks.